I used to think silence was heavy. The kind of silence that sat on your chest at night, making it hard to breathe. The kind that followed you from room to room, reminding you of everything you once had and everything you had lost. For years, my silence was exactly that. Painful, loud in its quietness. But not anymore. There was a time when this house was full. Not just with furniture or neatly arranged curtains, but with laughter, his laughter. My son's laughter. It used to echo through these walls like a song I never got tired of hearing. Mom, where's my shirt? Mom, I'm late. Mom, did you make breakfast? His voice was everywhere.
And
I was everything to him. I remember how small his hands once were. How they used to wrap around my fingers when we crossed the street. How he would fall asleep on my lap, trusting me with his whole world. I raised him alone. Not because I had planned to, but because life had its own plans. I worked, sacrificed, and stayed strong, even on the days I felt like breaking. I never let him see how hard it was. I made sure his world felt safe, warm, and complete. And for a long time it was, until it wasn't. The day he told me he was getting married, I smiled. A real smile. Not forced. Not hidden behind anything. I was happy for him. Mom, her name is Sanaa, he said, his eyes shining in a way I hadn't seen before. You're going to love her. And I believed him. Because I loved him. The house felt alive again during the wedding preparations. Guests came and went. Music filled the air. I watched my son step into a new chapter of his life, proud of the man he had become. And when Sanaa walked into our home as his wife, I welcomed her with open arms. This is your home now, I told her. I meant it. I truly did. At first, everything felt normal. She was polite, quiet, respectful in a way that felt distant, but I didn't think much of it. Not everyone shows love the same way, I reminded myself. But slowly things began to change. Not suddenly, not loudly, but quietly. So quietly that at first, I couldn't even explain what felt different. My son stopped asking me where his shirt was. Stopped calling out, Mom, I'm late. Stopped needing me. And I told myself that was okay. Because that's what happens, right? Children grow up. They build their own lives. They find someone to share it with. This is what I had raised him for. So, why did it hurt? One evening, I made his favorite dinner. Something I hadn't done in a while. I thought maybe it would remind him of the old days. Maybe we would sit together, laugh a little, talk like we used to. I set the table. Carefully. Hopefully. When they came home, I smiled. I made dinner, I said. He glanced at the table, then at Sanaa. Oh, we already ate outside, he replied casually.
Just like that.
No hesitation. No second thought. I nodded. Oh, okay. They went to their room. And I stood there, staring at the food that had gone cold before anyone even touched it. That night, I didn't cry. But something inside me shifted. It wasn't just one moment. It was many, small ones. The kind that slowly build into something heavy. He stopped sitting with me in the evenings. Stopped asking how my day was. Stopped noticing when I was quiet. Sanaa never really spoke to me unless necessary. Her words were polite, but distant. Like I was a guest in my own home. And maybe I was. I started spending more time in my room, not because anyone asked me to, but because I didn't know where I fit anymore. The living room felt like theirs. The kitchen felt like hers. And my presence felt unnecessary. So I became quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that slowly erases you. One afternoon, I overheard them talking. Not intentionally. I was passing by their door when I heard Sanaa's voice. She's always around, she said softly. I just feel like we don't have our own space. There was a pause. Then my son replied, I'll handle it. I didn't wait to hear more. I walked away. Slowly. Carefully. Like if I made any sudden movement, something inside me would break completely. That evening, he came to me. Mom, he said, sitting across from me. Maybe you should try to give us a little space. His voice was gentle, but his words were not. I looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time, I didn't recognize the boy I had raised. Of course, I said quietly, because what else could I say? After that, I became even quieter. I stopped waiting for him, stopped expecting conversations, stopped cooking his favorite meals. I stopped being who I used to be. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. And slowly I learned something. Silence, when forced upon you, is painful. But silence, when chosen, is different. I began to wake up early, not to make breakfast for anyone, but for myself. I started taking walks, long ones, the kind where you don't rush back home, because for the first time there was nothing waiting for me there. And strangely, that started to feel okay. I found small things that brought me peace. A cup of tea by the window, the sound of birds in the morning, a book I had never had time to read before. I started living not as someone's mother, but as myself. And I realized something I had forgotten for years. I existed beyond him. One day, I didn't come home until late. No one called, no one asked, and instead of feeling hurt, I felt free. That's when it happened. The shift. The moment my silence changed. It was no longer filled with waiting. No longer filled with hope that someone would notice me. No longer filled with pain. It became peaceful. Weeks later, my son knocked on my door. It was unusual. He rarely did that anymore. "Mom," he said. I looked up from my book. "Yes." He hesitated. "You've been different." I smiled slightly. "Have I?" "You don't talk much," he said. "You don't sit with us anymore." I closed my book gently. "I thought you wanted space," I replied. He looked uncomfortable. "That's not what I meant." I didn't argue. I didn't explain. Because for the first time, I didn't feel the need to. "I'm okay," I said simply. And I meant it. He stood there for a moment, as if expecting more. But there was nothing more to say. Because the truth was, I had already said everything. Just not with words. That night, I sat by the window again. The same window where I had once waited for him to come home. The same window where I had cried silently, hoping things would change. But now, I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't lonely. I wasn't broken. I wasn't even sad. I was still. And for the first time in years, that stillness didn't hurt. My silence was no longer painful. It was mine. And that made all the difference. The next morning felt different. Not because anything had changed in the house, but because something had changed inside me. For years, my mornings began with purpose tied to someone else. Making breakfast, checking if my son had everything he needed, adjusting my day around his. But now, I woke up slowly, peacefully. There was no rush, no urgency, no voice calling out, "Mom." And strangely, I didn't miss it the way I thought I would. I walked into the kitchen, not as someone responsible for everyone, but simply as myself. Sana was already there. She glanced at me briefly, then looked away. "Good morning," I said calmly. "Morning," she replied, her tone neutral. There was a time when that kind of response would have lingered in my mind all day. I would have wondered, did I do something wrong? Is she upset? Why doesn't she talk to me? But now, I just poured myself a cup of tea and sat down. No overthinking. No heaviness. Just acceptance. My son walked in a few minutes later. He looked at me, then at the table. "You didn't make breakfast?" he asked, almost instinctively. For a moment I saw it, the old habit, the expectation that I would always be there, doing what I had always done. I met his eyes gently. "I wasn't hungry earlier," I said. It wasn't an excuse. It was simply the truth. He seemed confused. Not upset. Not angry. Just unsure. As if he was trying to understand this version of me. And I didn't rush to explain it. Because this version of me didn't need to be understood by anyone else. Days passed. Then more days. The house remained the same, but the energy between us had shifted. I no longer moved around trying to avoid being in the way. I didn't retreat to my room out of sadness anymore. If I sat in the living room, I sat there because I wanted to, not because I was hoping someone would join me. And if no one did, that was okay too. One evening, I was watching a show. Something light. Something I used to never have time for. Sanal walked in and paused. You watch TV? She asked, almost surprised. I smiled faintly. Sometimes. She hesitated, then sat on the far end of the couch. We didn't talk, but for the first time, the silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't forced. It simply existed. I noticed something else too. She started observing me, not openly, but quietly, the way I had once observed her, trying to understand her place in this home. Now, the roles had shifted. A few days later, she asked, "Do you go out every morning?" "Yes," I replied. "I take a walk." "Alone?" "Yes." She nodded slowly. I could see the question behind her eyes, but she didn't ask it.
Why?
Why would someone choose to be alone and not feel lonely? That answer wasn't something I could explain. It was something she would have to understand on her own. That same week, my son came home earlier than usual. I was sitting by the window reading. He stood there for a moment before speaking. "Mom," he said softly. I looked up. "Yes. Do you need anything?" The question was simple, but it carried something deeper.
Guilt. Concern.
Maybe even confusion. I closed my book. "I'm fine," I said. He frowned slightly. "You always say that." I smiled. "Because it's true." He sat down across from me, and for a moment, it felt like the past had returned. Just a little. "You don't talk to me much anymore," he said. I tilted my head slightly. "You're busy." That's not an answer. I looked at him carefully. "It's not a complaint either," I replied.
He sighed.
"I feel like you've changed." I didn't deny it. "I have." There was a long pause, the kind that used to feel heavy.
But now.
It felt honest. "I didn't realize," he started, then stopped. "Didn't realize what?" I asked gently. How distant things had become. I held his gaze. "Distance isn't always loud," I said. "Sometimes it happens quietly. So quietly you don't notice until it's already there." He looked down, and in that moment, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Not the man he had become, but the boy he used to be.
Lost.
Unsure. Trying to understand something bigger than himself. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said, and for the first time, he acknowledged it. I took a slow breath. "I know," I replied, "because I did." He hadn't woken up one day and decided to forget me. Life had simply pulled him in a different direction, and I had stayed still, waiting, hoping, holding on, but not anymore. "I think," he said carefully, "I just assumed you would always be there. The same way." I nodded. "That's what mothers do, right?" he added. I smiled gently. "Yes," I said, "but we are also human." That sentence stayed in the air. Simple, but powerful. Later that night, something unexpected happened. Sana knocked on my door. It was the first time she had ever done that. "Can I come in?" she asked. "Of course," I said. She stepped inside, looking slightly uncomfortable. "I wanted to say something," she began. I waited. "I didn't understand you before," she admitted. "I thought maybe you didn't like me." I was surprised. "I never disliked you," I said softly. She looked relieved but also thoughtful. "I think I just didn't know how to fit in," she said. And instead of trying, I created distance. Her honesty caught me off guard, but not in a bad way, in a real way. "I did the same," I said. She looked up. "I didn't know where I fit anymore either," I continued. So I stepped back. We both sat there for a moment. Two women, different roles, same confusion. "I didn't realize it would affect you so much," she said quietly. "It did," I admitted. "At first." She nodded slowly. "But not anymore," I added. She looked at me, curious. "Why?" I smiled faintly. "Because I stopped expecting things from others and started giving that care to myself." She didn't respond immediately, but I could tell she was thinking about it, really thinking. "Is that why you seem peaceful now?" she asked. "Yes," I said simply. That night, after she left, I sat alone again, but it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like space. Healthy space. The kind that allows things to grow. Over the next few weeks, things didn't magically become perfect. We didn't suddenly turn into a close, talkative family. But something had shifted. Respect, awareness, understanding. My son started sitting with me again sometimes. Not out of obligation,
but because he wanted to.
Sana began joining me for tea occasionally. Short conversations.
Simple ones.
But real. And me? I didn't go back to who I used to be. I didn't lose myself again in their lives. I didn't rebuild my identity around being needed. I stayed myself. Because I had learned something important. Love doesn't have to be loud to be real. And silence doesn't have to be painful to be meaningful. One evening, as the sun set outside my window, my son sat beside me. "Mom," he said softly. "Yes, I'm glad you're like this now." I looked at him. Like what? He smiled slightly. Strong. I didn't respond right away. I just looked out the window, at the sky changing colors, at the quiet world outside. And then I said something I had never said before. Me too. Because this version of me didn't come from being needed, didn't come from being seen, didn't come from holding on. It came from letting go. My silence was no longer painful. It had become my peace. And in that peace, I finally found myself again. It happened on an ordinary evening. No arguments. No raised voices. No dramatic moment that demanded attention. Just something quiet. I was sitting by the window again. The same place where I had once waited. The same place where my silence used to ache. But now it felt like home. Not the house, but that small space within myself where I finally felt complete. Behind me, I heard footsteps.
Soft.
Hesitant. "Mom," my son's voice came, almost unsure. I turned slowly. He was standing there, not as the confident man I had seen for months, but as someone carrying something heavy inside him. Sana stood a little behind him, quiet, watching. "Can we sit with you?" he asked. For a moment, time felt like it paused. This used to be everything I waited for. A simple moment, a simple request. Something I had once prayed would come back. And now it was here. But I was no longer the same person who had been waiting. "Of course," I said gently. They sat beside me. Not too close. Not too far. Just enough to share the silence. No one spoke for a while. And that silence that said everything. "I miss you," he said finally. 3 simple words. But they carried years of distance. I looked at him. Really looked at him. And I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to fully accept before. I didn't miss him the way I used to. Not because I didn't love him, but because I had already let go of the version of him I kept holding on to. "I'm still here," I said softly. His eyes filled with something fragile. "Not like before," he whispered. And he was right. Not like before. I took a deep breath. "Before, I lived my life around you," I said. "Every moment, every thought, it was all about you." My voice didn't shake. It didn't break. Because this wasn't pain anymore. It was truth. And when that changed, I didn't know who I was without that. He lowered his gaze. Sana listened quietly. "But now," I continued, "I do." There was a long pause. Not uncomfortable, just honest. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know," I replied. And I meant it. I didn't need explanations anymore. I didn't need him to go back in time and fix anything. Because I had already healed from what broke me. Sana spoke then, softly. "You deserved better from both of us." I turned to her. And for the first time, I didn't see distance between us. I saw understanding. Growth. Humanity. "We all do the best we can with what we understand at the time," I said. "And sometimes we understand too late." Tears slipped down her face. My son reached for my hand, carefully, like he used to when he was a child. And for a moment, I let him hold it. But something was different. I didn't hold on tightly. I didn't cling to that touch like I once would have. Because I no longer needed it to feel whole. "I love you, Mom," he said. The words were familiar. But this time, they didn't carry expectation. They didn't come with a need for me to give everything in return. "I love you too," I said. And I did. Deeply. endlessly, but differently. Because now, my love had boundaries. My love had space. My love included myself. We sat there together as the sun slowly disappeared. 3 people. Not perfect. Not the same as before. But real. After a while, they stood up. "Good night, Mom," he said. "Good night," I replied. Sanaa gave me a small, genuine smile before leaving. And just like that, I was alone again. But not lonely. I turned back to the window. The sky had turned dark now. Quiet.
Still.
Beautiful in its own way. And in that moment, I realized something that felt like the final piece of my journey. I didn't need them to stay. I didn't need them to fill the silence. I didn't need anything outside of myself to feel at peace, because I had already found it. Within me, my silence was no longer a place of waiting. It was no longer a place of pain. It was no longer a reminder of what I had lost. It had become a space of healing, of strength, of quiet, unshakable love. And for the first time in my life, I didn't fear being alone. I embraced it, because in that silence, I didn't lose anyone. I finally found myself.